Everybody, what's going on? Welcome to the Artist of Data Science Happy Hour. It is Friday, August 6th, my last day of work at Price Industries. Can't believe it, man. Thank you so much, everybody at the team. Warren, Dave, Kyle, you guys are all awesome. Thank you so much for giving me this opportunity to work with you all. I really enjoyed my time there. I'm on to the next move. I'll be at Comet ML working on some really cool, interesting, fun stuff. That's going to be happening in about a month. So I'm excited for that, guys. Also, shout out to the fact that as of today, we just crossed 75,000 downloads of the podcast. That's wild to me. That's a huge metric for me. I'm really excited for that. Thank you everybody who's been listening and helping to make that possible. Literally, I couldn't have done it without you guys because it would be very difficult for me to listen to all 171 episodes. Divided by however hundreds of times I would have to watch you each episode. Shout out to everybody in the room. What's up? Ken G in the building. David, what's going on? We got Abe, we got Monica. Good to see you again, Monica. It's been quite a long time. Happy to have you back. Vin, what's going on? Yeah. Ben Taylor, what's going on? Matt Sharp, how's it going, my friend? Serge and everybody else, man. Super excited to have you guys here. Somebody else also had a transition today. It's David Knickerbocker. David, what's going on, man? You got some comments here with people interested to hear about your new gig. I am too, man. So how's it feel, man? How's it feel? How you've been a McAfee for how long? How's it feel to leave after however many years it's been?
It's definitely surreal. I've been at McAfee for 6 years, and so I made a lot of friends. But most of my really close friends have already moved on from McAfee. But I did have a core group that I was close with. So today was pretty difficult saying my last goodbyes and whatnot.
Yeah.
But you gotta do brave things sometimes. And so
you gotta take a risk, man. And that's what you're doing, man.
It's scary as hell though, because there's no safety net anymore. I'm making a jump to start my own thing, and so we'll see.
Dude, it's exciting, man. I'm excited to hear about this. If you want to share any details, by all means, let us know what your thing is about. I'm sure we'd all be happy to hear. But if not, man, it's my third job in 3 years. I remember leaving that first job back in the end of 2018. That was like a weight coming off my chest. Like I just hated that place. And then my second job, leaving Bold, I was like genuinely just sad because I loved my team. We had such a good group of friends, such a great team. And this is the first time I'm leaving a job, and I'm feeling genuinely like excited. Like I'm super excited for what's coming next, as I'm sure you are as well. But yeah, man, like talk to us about this. What's the new about?
Yeah, so I'm not going to go into too much details yet because we're still working on a lot of stuff. But it's a disinformation mitigation company, and so we'll be mapping out that kind of malign disinformation, not just like people making mistakes on social media, but bigger than that. And so there's going to be a lot of network science involved, a lot of NLP. So all the stuff that you guys see me get all excited about, I get to build the tech stack in my image, and so it's going to be awesome. It's just me and another guy right now, so we're building the idea the way that we think that we should, and we'll see how well it does. So
yeah, that's cool, man. It sounds like a really awesome project, man. Shout out to everybody watching on LinkedIn and on YouTube and Twitch. If you guys got comments, go ahead and drop them in the chat. We'd be happy to take your comments. I know a couple people had some questions queued up. Abe, you had a question that you'd hit me up about a couple days ago. If we want to go to your question, then we'll go to Russell's question, and then as soon as Mark gets here, we'll get to his question. And in the meantime, if you guys have questions, let us know right there in the chat, and I will put you in the queue.
Did you just say my name?
Abe, yeah.
Yeah, kind of cut out for a second. Yeah, so hey everyone, first time speaking. So I just started my first SQL project at work. So I got my big boy pants on. I started working on my first query, and it's I'm kind of getting some help, but I'm not asking everyone for like the answers. I'm like, hey, you just point me in the right direction. And I kind of did the step backwards. I started writing the query, and then I didn't gather all the requirements first. So like, what do you guys recommend for someone that's like doing SQL, like for real at a job, to like, how to look at the problem or the question and like figure out, all right, what do I need to do to, get to the final result?
Yeah, absolutely, man. My approach would be to figure out the the schema as much as possible. See if there's a data dictionary floating around. See if I can get like an ERD or something, just so I can conceptualize what is in this abstract database, which in my experience that doesn't happen as often as it should. So you have to probably go and ask a lot of questions, connect with people, and pick their brains, these local experts, and stitch together your own web of knowledge. But Eric, I think you might have been going through something similar, right? Didn't you ask a question about this topic a while ago? What have you learned since then?
So, so I think your main question was, when you're gathering it, how do you just go about getting the right information so that you find you're not kind of like barking up the wrong tree? Or
Right, yeah. So there's a data dictionary, but there's like thousands of tables because it's like I work in like the healthcare, like financial part of my school. So we would do the financials for all the clinics. So there's like thousands of tables and there's no ERDs, but I'm only going to be working out of like 10 tables. And then it's just like, so it's just like I go to the data dictionary and then I just try to figure out like, all right, this goes here, I guess. And I'm just like
Yeah.
making like a cheat sheet for myself to like, all right, these are the 10 tables I'm going to work with the most, and these are what I'm going to do to kind of like the most.
Yeah. So like a couple things that kind of come to mind for me. One is, yeah, just ask questions, because you're not dumb if you ask the questions of how things are related. Two, you are a blessed man to have a data dictionary. That's fantastic, because they don't grow on trees. And then the other thing is, I have a little query that just pulls from the information schema. It says like, and I just say, give me the table name and the column name, where column name is like, and then I just type in like, I'm looking for something that sounds like revenue. So I just search revenue and it brings up every instance of revenue that might be useful to me. And that's been super helpful. And then the only other little thing I would add is tons of little tiny queries like, show me top 10. What does it look like? Okay, show me top 10 again. Now that I changed something, does it, is it working for me? And just like iterating forward until I'm getting somewhere bigger, and then maybe try something a little bigger before finally doing a big query that's going to take longer, and that way I avoid wasting time.
Yeah, I need that. Whatever you just said, I need that.
I will
appreciate it.
drop it in the chat. I could do that. I don't know
Yeah.
if you can copy it though. Crap.
I could share the text file, so I
That would
can
be
send
great.
that over to you. Let's hear from Ken on this one. By the way, if you guys did not get a chance to tune into Ken and Ali Miller live on Instagram yesterday, you guys missed out, but you guys are running it back. So
We are,
let us
yeah.
know-
It got
let us know.
deleted on Instagram, which was a huge bummer. We had a great combo, and then there was some software issues on the way out. But yeah, well, I don't know when we're doing it, but we're definitely running it back again. I want to 100% echo what Eric was saying about iterating on things. Something, especially when you're new to a company, I find this a lot with consulting, where we have to get up to speed really quickly, is working and iterating in that fashion, but also keeping a kind of running list of questions and asking in batches. So rather than like constantly pinging someone on Slack, like when you run into things, it's this list that you're creating. And sometimes you realize as you get further down the iteration process, you're like, oh, I answered that question myself. And so choosing specific points, or maybe even setting like a 30-minute meeting, a check-in with someone where you can ask dedicated questions, can be really effective. Sometimes even more effective than pinging on Slack. I know everyone wants to get rid of all the meetings on their calendar, but sometimes, again, in the early stages of getting together with a team or getting integrated with an organization, if you're using meetings very systematically and very purposefully, I think that they can create a lot of value for you, and also building a relationship with the other people you work with as well.
Thank you very much, Ken. Anybody else want to comment on this? I saw some great comments right there in the chat. If anybody wants to speak on it, just go for it. If not, we can move on to the next question. Abe, do you feel like your question was answered?
Yeah. Thank you. I appreciate everyone.
Awesome. Yeah. Cool, guys. Let's keep it moving. And so the queue right now is Russell, Mark, then we got Eric, and then Jacob. So Russell, go for it.
Yeah, thanks, Harpreet. Good evening, everybody. So I've got a question that's related to GANs, deepfakes, etc. And it's kind of a bit of fun, but I think there's a definite ethical question behind it. Can Can you guys still hear me?
Yeah, we can still
Yes.
hear you. Your video
Okay,
just keeps kind of.
Yeah, it's a camera. Sorry, I think it's trying to paint me out of the picture. Maybe it doesn't like my face. I don't know.
It was an
but-
invisibility GAN there, Russell.
Yeah, indeed. So recently I've had the option to use creator mode on LinkedIn. So I haven't done it for a long time, but I've recently enabled it, and I know you can set the animated video for your profile picture. However, most of the ones that I've seen just edit from the profile picture to a video, and it's a really kind of junk edit. It doesn't segue or transition particularly well. So it dawned on me that perhaps some of these great GANs and deepfake videos, I saw Steve Nuri had a great one for Morgan Freeman that someone had put out on LinkedIn recently. You guys may have seen it. So I wondered if anyone's considered doing the same for their own picture. So to keep their own profile picture, animate their own profile picture, and have that picture speak whatever they're going through at the time. Just as a kind of an interesting way to make the best use of this new feature in LinkedIn. I mean, for me, it'd be good. You can probably see I've got a few grey hairs on my beard now. My profile picture was maybe only 24 months ago. All of these grey hairs have come during the COVID lockdown. But it would. I'd still look a little younger if I was to do that. So firstly, has anyone considered doing it? And then secondly, if it is possible to do that, what are the ethical implications? We're talking about a bit of a fun way of using this, but if that can be done, what else can be done out, in the wider media that could have, poor ethical repercussions?
Ben, go for it.
I like this question. Good, Chris. Good question, Russell. So I thought about doing it. So when you go do headshots, so I've got my headshot on LinkedIn, and that I had to go do a session, get a professional photographer. You have to get like a wardrobe. It's a process. And so I would much rather just generate like 10,000 frames from like a very high resolution, like 4K, 8K camera. And then I would just have my GAN that I could then play with, change the expressions. I could also modify the attractiveness. I just make myself a little bit more attractive. So not enough that you would call foul, but enough that when you saw me in person, you'd be like, man, he's having an off day. But actually, I just increased my attractiveness 20%.
Give the rest of us a chance, Ben. Come on.
Yeah, no, it's is it ethical? I don't know. I guess you have models that get touched up today, post-processing with Photoshop, and so someone brought that up. There was a debate that someone brought up, and they said that this could be very toxic because you could have AI making humans look that much more unrealistic in a way that's effortless. But that's already happening with Photoshop. So I don't know. So if you guys notice that my eye color starts changing to something that's less than human, you might know it's attractiveness going off the rails. I'm trying to go to future evolution.
That's pretty interesting, right? Because I mean, in real life, I dye my beard, it's quite patchy white everywhere, and I turned the touch-up filter on Zoom here a little bit too to kind of increase the attractiveness.
Wait, I'm confused. Why would anyone want to de-white their hair? Can someone explain this to me? It makes no sense to me.
If it's
Ben's
patchy,
just starting to
not
look
even
better, in my opinion.
Once it's all evenly dispersed, I'll reveal it. I'll reveal the Harpreet the white. Kenji, go for it, or Harpreet the gray. Which one will be? I don't know. Whichever Gandalf is cooler.
So I think the image augmentation for more attractiveness or whatever it might be, that's a really interesting one, because I see a future where all of us are speaking through avatars that look similar to us as well. I mean, there's already that capability on iPhone. There's already those types of things. And I don't see touching up our appearance as being that different from that. I don't see that as much of an ethical issue as this being used by someone to impersonate us online or something along those lines. Obviously, that's a lot bigger and a lot scarier thing. My belief is if you're doing this with your own image, or you're having someone's consent to use their image and their likeness to create these things, that's totally fine. But once we get into using things did that person in the video from Steve Nor, did they get consent from Morgan Freeman to use his face and to use his voice in those sense? In those use cases, to me, that could be really scary. And we have some good deepfake detection, but it's a cat and mouse game. Like deepfakes are always going to be like iterating and improving, I would think, to a certain extent faster than we can keep up with tracking them, because the way that these models are built is that like to generate an image or like a deep fake, like you're using the same tool to validate that it is, or to like keep increasing its efficacy or its accuracy of like this deep fake model to train the model, right? Like the better the identification models are, the better the deep fakes do, because it is this feedback loop that's created. So to me, I actually like the idea of being able to have an avatar. I have an off day, my hair is like it was in the video the other day, and I can just pop on my avatar. It looks very close to me. It doesn't have to be exactly me. But that way, like I'm in my PJs in my meeting, it doesn't matter. Like it looks great. I'm all trimmed up in a suit. I think that's a great use case for this. Unfortunately, it does come with those potentially nefarious consequences.
Attractiveness is actually such an interesting topic. I was going to sneak in real quick that attractiveness. So for people that are listening, I've actually done a lot of deep learning analysis on attractiveness. Just long time ago, like I was really curious and interested in it. So attractiveness,
the Tinder bio.
Yeah. So attractiveness is not a global standard. And so what that means, if I know I'm speaking in Dublin, I could actually increase my attractiveness in Dublin versus South Africa. Like sometimes we think it's a global standard because like the Hollywood effect or something, but it actually gets, do I need to look more familiar to the demographic where I'm traveling to? Like if I'm going to go speak in Croatia or something, like do I want to have hints of that in my avatar? Like that would be something that it wouldn't be science fiction. It'd be I think it'd be very straightforward to give hints of that ancestry in my face in a way that I show up and they're like, oh man, like you definitely look up. They're not going to let me not speak, but as far as my face, I don't know. I think it's funny what technology can allow you to do, and ethics, it becomes a very gray place to play sometimes. Like sometimes it's obvious, but sometimes are we allowed to look more attractive online? Like probably.
So, so I just want to sneak in here kind of about deep fakes and ethics. I think it was about a year ago, I showed up a company Zoom meeting with my CTO as an avatar, and I gave myself a promotion and a raise, and it didn't stick, but I guess that's some ethical boundaries there.
That's a good use case too. I like that.
The next use case is you show up as your CEO, angry at your CFO for a wire transfer. That's the next scenario. I need this wire transfer now, and you yell at them.
Yes, that would be right.
Serge, any comments here?
Yeah, that sounds like a very, very devious use case. But I wonder where you're going to get enough material of your CEO talking, I guess, from conferences and things like that. Given that, or you're going to record him in meetings?
Yeah, where do you get all the training data from?
I actually saw there's one company that with like 30 seconds of talking, they can produce a pretty good like voice augmentation. I can't remember the specific company. I was looking into this for a video a while ago, but I was astounded at that. Like the variance in pitch in a very short snippet of talking. It's pretty crazy.
Wonder if I could use all of that, all of Ken's YouTube videos for training data, morph myself into Kenji. Would you guys like me better if I was Kenji? If I was Kenji, would you guys like me any better? I don't know. Vin, any comments on this? If anybody else has any comments or anything they want to add in here, definitely go for it.
I think it's interesting when you start talking about the ethical ideas of this. What exactly, what's wrong with you changing your appearance and playing with your appearance? And is there going to be a single definition of wrong that everyone's going to agree with? And I think that's the biggest problem that we have with capabilities like deepfakes is you can make a really compelling case for it being a great thing, and you can make a really compelling case for the exact same use case being a bad thing. And so we have these sort of conflicting ideas of ethics that have to be reconciled at some point. And so I think, when you say, is this okay? Is this an appropriate use? You're not in one of those absolute, red flashing lights or, green landing lights areas. And there's so few really ethical areas that are perfectly well understood and everyone agrees on. So I think that's the most interesting thing about what you bring up is I would bet you the majority of people hearing you talk about that particular use case would have gone, really? I wouldn't have even thought about that as an ethical problem or there being an ethical problem. And I would be willing to bet that if we went, through everybody live stream here, everybody that's watching, someone would have a compelling argument for why that wouldn't be an ethical use. And there's this reconciliation process that we need to have as a field for, it's appropriate for 85% or 90% of people, but we have 4% who are heavily impacted in a negative way. And so what do you do then? And I think that's the bigger implication that's interesting to think about is how do we create a framework to, number one, accommodate the fact that the majority of people want to use this way, but also at the same time protecting a small minority who could be hurt by that application, just the one that you're using. Somehow there's probably a small percentage of people that could be hurt by this. So there's, that's the interesting outcome of conversations like this is we need to have a framework for that. How do we allow uses that are going to be, just from the simplest greed perspective, very economically lucrative and in the vast majority of cases harmless, but we have to also balance every other group and one group will potentially be impacted negatively.
So this actually ties in nicely because Mark had a question about ethics as well. So Russell, do you mind if we kind of pivot from the GAN's topic itself and kind of take the flow of the conversation towards this ethics direction? Mark, go for it. You had a question that you had lined up.
Yeah, so I recently posted an article about this company called Spot Shooter, where essentially they use AI to pick up on gunshots and inform the police and help try to reduce crime. The article I recently released essentially was saying how the police pressured analysts at this company to basically change the data to help them with cases to get their desired results. In addition, they did like a third-party research kind of as a watchdog, where essentially a lot of the gunshots, I think 90% of the time, they didn't even classify like gun crimes, right? And so it begs this question is like, when does AI, for me at least, when does AI ethics start? Because it's not necessarily like the model specifically. There's like all these other components in the chain of like ideation and scoping all the way to delivering, and where they're not even technologists and maybe like marketing or sales. Matt has some really great points I actually agree with. I changed my perspective a little bit on it. But essentially, it really, the main question I have is like, where do we start the AI ethics process? There's some people who are really like on it more so on the model building, like, do you classify it correctly? As for me, I'm more so thinking, it's everything, every aspect, even the part that's not necessarily AI. So I'm just curious what people think about that.
Mark, the last bit of your question there kind of cut out, but if anybody wants to comment.
Sure. Yeah, I'd say it starts with the data generation process and throughout the entire process. I don't think it's like there's like one clear division between, here's where the AI ethicists take over. I mean, it's just a question of having other stakeholders, other professionals that are well aware of the implications involved in the entire process. And that means like dealing with the data provenance, interfacing with stakeholders that could have troubling like, I don't know, like interests involving that problem, like you said, in this case, the police. And then also at the same time, informing, a certain angle to domain knowledge, because there's There's a domain knowledge that's needed to, of course, make the model performant, but there's a different domain knowledge that's needed to make the model fair. And in many cases, these things, they don't really, they overlap, but they're not. Of course, one thing is actually going to be countering the other. You can make the model more performant, and that's going to hurt the fairness, and the fairness is going to hurt the performance. So I think it can't be disentangled, like this is where you begin and I end. It's just I think it's a messy process, which is why I advocate for having, like, the platform for AI for the future. I imagine is like a full-on cockpit, where, like, there's all kinds of metrics being measured at the same time. It's not like driven by a single metric as it is in many cases right now. And and there's different eyes on it. It's not just the machine learning engineer, which is kind of the way it is, right now.
Yeah. I'd love to hear from people who haven't heard from yet. So either Monica, Vivian, Ben, even Tom or Dave. If you guys want to chime in on this, please let me know. But while I wait for you guys to chime in, I think it starts just even before data collect, like, generation process. It just, like, is this a thing that we should do with this technology that we have available to us? Is this a problem worth solving? Is this a thing worth building? Okay, if we do build this thing, what are some potential repercussions that are negative? Who might it actually be bad for? And think it through that way. That's kind of my perspective on it. Is just start from the beginning. Like, is this something that we should actually be doing with this technology?
And
Yeah,
just to echo that, Harpreet, I think that's the key thing, is you have to have a proactive discussion on potential. You haven't even started the project. Like, what are the potential issues that could happen? If you look in the media, most of the terrible things that happened with AI, like you had beauty.ai, you had, sexist wrestling models, racist gender classifiers, like all these things, they fell into the oops category. They weren't proactive. They didn't sit down and talk about what could go wrong. What are the potential? So I like the ideas being proactive, reactive. Don't be reactive. Don't say oops.
I guess another thing that keeps on popping up, because I agree with this, but it's like, I personally feel like companies, they have a fiduciary duty just to make money, right? And so that proactive piece, you can make an argument where it's like, yeah, you'll lose money if you get into the oops category, but with the fast iteration, that typically doesn't happen. So, like, should we regulate? But regulation would decrease innovation, and some other countries may not, and they may accelerate innovation. So, like, I feel like it's a messy balance. And I personally don't trust companies to make the right decision at a system level.
So,
Yeah.
some things do. Oh, sorry, someone else was.
Yeah. Okay, I'll jump in for a second. So, like 20 years ago, when I got into software, we were always told to think carefully about what data that we actually needed to collect from people, and only collect the data that you're actually going to use. And so it feels like a while back we were much stricter with ourselves on this, and maybe it's because we've become greedy in the era of big data, where we can collect anything that we want and store as much data as we want, that kind of those requirements went away, and maybe we should get back to that. But I like the thoughts that before we build models, it's not very difficult to think whether that model is a good thing to be doing, or whether the data is going to be difficult, or whether there's ethical implications to even getting that data. So I hope that some of that strictness does come back to software development in the age of big data, is what I wanted to throw in there.
Yes, let's go to Ben, then Vin, and if anybody else wants to jump in here, please let me know. Just raise your hand, and I will add you to the list.
So some things do have regulation and protections in place. Like, I know for HR, they've got the 4/5 rule. Like, they've got some different things, but the issue is it's not totally inclusive, right? Like, there are plenty of biases out there that are not included in that. And then even with those regulations, you run into, is this bias in the wild discoverable? So if it's not discoverable, like, you can have a big entity, a big company that has, and this obviously happens today, like, you have name brand companies that we've all heard of that have rampant bias internally. And sometimes that's unknown. Like sometimes it's not malicious, it's not intentional, they're not aware of it. It's, you know, an auditing thing. So I think a big part of that's about raising awareness, but when you're working with these companies, they don't want to share that data because it's a legal risk. So it's more about that, you know, HR groups and different people having that awareness that I want to know what my company's doing. Like that should be the question that everyone's asking. I want to know what my company's doing. Because if I come knocking to ask what your company's doing, your lawyers aren't going to like that.
Go to Vin, and then after Vin, we'll go to Ken, Matt, and then Tom. And then if anybody else wants to chime in, please just hit the reaction button, raise your hand. I'd love to hear from everybody. Let's go for Vin.
I'm going to take this meta and 500, miles forward from where we are right now, because we're discussing all the easy stuff. We're discussing all the obvious stuff, because companies do oopses, and that's forever a technology problem. But there are malicious actors. There are companies and countries. There are entire regions of the world that don't care, legitimately have no regulation, never will. And even the regulation that they may be putting in place is for some companies and some entities, but not for the government or for other companies. And so we're always going to have bad actors. They are going to build this stuff. It's going to get out into the wild. People are going to be able to use it. Companies will buy it, and it will propagate. There's no way to stop that. That's something regulation has failed time and time again at trying to rein in the impacts, especially negative impacts of technology. And so I think we have to start from there and just say, look, this is going to get built. Companies are going to use it. And now we have to create a framework, because that's the reality. And I think the majority of regulations, the problem with regulation is it assumes that companies are inherently good. No one will build this if we tell them not to. And none of that's really true. So you can't start with that. You basically have to assume we've got criminals out there, just like we do with everything else. And cybersecurity is the same framework. Assume there are bad actors, assume that they're out there, and we have to create a framework to protect people. That's really where we need to go with this. And the biggest problem that we have with protecting people isn't so much we don't know what's going to happen, because you can guess. I mean, you look at hiring, there are biased hiring systems out there. You look at credit risk scoring, they're there. I mean, where the bad and the greatest impact areas are right now. And so we need to go to those areas and say, look, we have to get a framework that all of us can agree on. And this is the hardest part, because, if you look at this from even like a philosophical standpoint, we've been having this argument for 3,000 years. I mean, Socrates wrote it down. It's the Theros or Erythros dilemma, where literally he goes through exactly what we are about to go through with AI ethics. And Jay-Z said it way better, so I don't go through, 2 hours. He said, Socrates asked, whose bias do y'all seek? Because that's where we're at. Whose bias is okay? And can we get consensus on the biases that we all have? That's going to be incredibly hard, especially in a country like America, where our biases go from 0 to 100 and everything in between, and we have to come to some sort of consensus. That's going to be the biggest piece of the AI ethics puzzle, is until you have a framework that people agree on, you'll continually have bad actors at the fringes who are going to find ways to manipulate any system that we put in place. And so it's almost down to us as practitioners to be the ones who say, look, this is how we're going to start policing ourselves to protect, not to prevent, because we can't do that, but to protect people from the impacts of unfair algorithms. And to Ben's point, we can't detect them all. We're not going to know that they're out there, but we can pretty much guess where they are. And so we can be looking in those quote unquote high crime locations. Like, you keep an eye on your banks. Why? Because that's where bank thieves want to go get money. And so you want to keep an eye on the communities that have consistently been marginalized, the communities and groups who have consistently been impacted by everything else because that's where the impacts are in the data. And so we have to, as a community, come together and say, look, we are going to keep an eye on these groups because we know where the problems are going to be. And so we're just going to try to protect them.
When we talk about framework, just as an example, just so we can conceptualize that, is that like framework would be something like when you talk about getting consensus on our bias, is that like the Bill of Rights or the Constitution? Is that what you mean by framework, or is there some other example?
It's going to have to be even more granular than that, because most of what happens online doesn't get covered by the Constitution. And it isn't. The Constitution is this wonderful document. I love it. I'm glad we built a country around it. But at the same time, it didn't anticipate the planet that we are on right now. And it's not a framework that could govern effectively. We're at the end of nations. We really are. We are coming to the end of nations. And so we have to start understanding that the frameworks we come to an agreement on. This isn't just, like I said, America is going to be hard. Like if you can get America right, you can pretty much get the rest of the world to work, because whatever gets this diverse a group of opinions to come together and agree that process of consensus will probably play fairly well across the world. But that process of consensus is beyond our laws right now. It is beyond getting people on social media to follow hashtags. It is far beyond where we have any sort of legal or ethical frameworks that cover. So when I talk about building a framework for what's okay and what isn't, and it was back to what I said back in the last question, the legal framework has to allow for things that 85% of the world wants to actually happen, while protecting the maybe 1% or 0.5% of people who will be impacted negatively by it. So we have to protect them while admitting to the fact that this thing that 85% of the world wants is going to exist. It's going to show up. It will happen. Now we have to protect people. And we can't say, don't do it. I'll throw $1 billion fine at you, because Google will laugh at you. You can throw $1 billion fine at Facebook. They won't care. It's really it's going to happen. Let's protect the people, instead of trying to do something that really is impossible, and trying to build a framework that's all encompassing.
Ben, thank you so much, Matt. It's a lot to think about there. Some excellent points. I have to digest that. Ken, let's hear from you. Then after Ken, Matt, you had your hand up. If you still want to go, let me know. Then after Matt, we'll go to Tom. Shout out to everybody else that just joined in. Avery, what's going on? Makika, what's going on? Greg, what's going on, my friend? Ben, the Seattle data guy, what's going on, man? If any of you guys want to chime in on this discussion, if you guys want to say something, let me know, but just raise your hand and I'll add you to the queue. Ken, go for it.
Yeah, Vin, that was a tough one to follow up. I agreed with everything you said there, and you said it so eloquently. I think something that I really want to highlight, and it gets a little muddled in these conversations sometimes, is that like the models, the algorithms, they're not inherently biased or evil, right? They're just math for the most part, right? What happens is when the data goes into them, and when we choose a specific dependent variable to evaluate them based on, that's when essentially the bad stuff starts to happen. And so like the data that goes in and what we're trying to predict, those can be looked at almost in isolation of the algorithm. We can say, are these things good to predict? Are these things acceptable to collect and analyze? And this then becomes an ethics question more so than an AI ethics question. Like these are all ethics questions. I mean, because it is in the machine learning AI domain, that does bring a couple additional wrinkles. I won't completely ignore that fact. But at a high level, even people that aren't associated with this domain can understand the challenges that go into these models and come out of these models. And so I think that, one, that's a little bit refreshing. Like these things are tools where people can misuse tools. They use them all the time. You can use a hammer to build something. You can use a hammer to knock someone over the head. And if we're viewing him in that frame, although it might be slightly overly simplistic, it can also help us understand how we can set in place the frameworks that Vin was talking about. And so I would hope that deconstructs these things for people that do have to make decisions around them. They do have to think about these ethical constraints on a daily basis that aren't data scientists, ML engineers, AI researchers, whatever it is. Because to me, that's something, this is a problem we can all start to tackle. And it seems like a lot of the time it's just shoved on the engineers and the data scientists, like, you're responsible for making this ethical. No, that's a conversation for all of us to have. Like, we might be building this and training it, but this is a lot broader conversation than just what we're doing independently.
Yeah, man, absolutely love that, because like you said, the algorithms, they're just a series of steps. They're just math. They're inherently, without any judgment, bias, or emotion or anything like that. It is the human actor at the front end of it that has the duty, right? The company, the question you're trying to answer, the product you're trying to develop, the thing you're trying to do. Yeah, I like that a lot, man. Let's hear from Matt. Are you still here? Yes, you are, Matt. Yeah. Let's go to Matt, and then after Matt, Tom, and Monica. You got some good comments in the chat. If you want to chime in on that, I'd be happy to hear from you.
Yeah, so I guess what I was just going to say was, slightly different from what was already said, but, essentially kind of echoing a little bit of what was said, like from Ken, is like, ultimately ethics is really a human problem, right? Like a lot of AI is, again, algorithms and math and, the data you put in and other things like that. But obviously humans still get in the mix in a lot of those problems. And, Mark was talking a little bit, it's like, yeah, I don't trust companies to do it. And it's like, okay, but like, do you trust governments to do it? And, like, ultimately, I think part of being at least American is lack of trusting any like authority to get it right. And so, like, ultimately, like if we do kind of take Ben's advice of like, hey, let's look into our own company. And like, I think there's just something that, like, everyone needs to realize, like, there are going to be times when, your AI algorithms, machine learning algorithms, are just going to get it wrong. And so I think a large part of the conversation is like, how do we build systems in place to fix these errors? Like, I mean, this is a problem as old, just because, like, like, even before AI, like, just software, like, hey, what happens when Verizon charges you twice as much? Well, you call them up, talk to a customer service, and get that fixed, and hopefully only pay them once. And if they don't fix the charge or pay you more for like fixing the charge or other things like that, then like people get angry, right? And so all of this again goes back to the ethics question. And so kind of wrapping in of like, yeah, I think this has to extend out to, the whole human experience and how people experience how, their interactions with machines.
Yeah. Like, I mean, what's the ethics around, like I feel like the ethics around AI models, is it equivalent, the same problems? Is it different from, what's the similarities, overlaps with the ethics of creating guns and gun ownership and things like that, right? It's just one's a tangible thing and one is intangible. It's, yeah, interesting stuff. Tom, let's hear from you, and then whoever else, Monica, let's hear from you, because you got some great comments here in the chat.
So this is a ocean liner turn circling around back to something Ben said way at the beginning about the proactivity of it. And it reminded me of this friend that I made on LinkedIn that reached out to me. We even had a call. I just entered her name in our chat, Divya Dwivedi. She's a lawyer. They go by a different term, out of India. And she was proactively wanting to get involved in AI ethics. And I was so impressed by that she wanted to serve companies to give them a leg up, a heads up, be more proactive about AI ethics. But the other two things I wanted to point out is it seems like it's common for people to flail their arms very quickly. If there's an accusation that there's racism in classification with image algorithms, that can be unfair just because of our technology at times. It's quite advanced imaging stuff that can on the fly see differences. I'm trying to use general terminology here. Let's say you've got an image and there's a certain zone of the shades that it's just hard to distinguish features in that zone. Now, there's some really great improvements, but they're not ubiquitous yet. And so that's a type of bias that's caused by technological limits. The other bias is something we could deal with more effectively in the data realm. I think a lot of data scientists, or I shouldn't put it on data scientists, a lot of data organizations forget to employ the central limit theorem. Look at your current data set, and then when you bring another new amount of data assets in and augment to that, what is happening? Track to see if you're approaching the central limit theorem using the tools for that. And then you can at that, but you still have to constantly challenge yourself. Are we broadly sampling enough from the population? In other words, what sectors exist that we're not sampling from? But these are all ways we can deal with it at a technical level. But I think also it shouldn't mean that we don't put some models into production just because we're not sure we've reached the central limit theorem yet or not. We just need to ask ourselves, or we need to be honest that, hey, this model could have problems because we're still collecting data. Those are my thoughts on this. But this, boy, I always typically go silent when we start talking ethics because it's messy.
Yeah, definitely. Tom, thank you so much. Monica, did you want to chime in here?
Yeah, it's definitely a spicy topic. I agree with you there, Tom. This whole thing, I said in the chat, it reminds me of the healthcare industry with the different technologies that are being used now to analyze and predict certain diseases. So you need to collect data and pictures in order to train your models. And in some cases, that data might not be considered or even treated as PII or PHI. So that could essentially lead to a future oops. And Russell had asked if there was any way to anomalize that data. And I'm sure that there is, but then that could potentially harm your accuracy for your models because you need certain data elements. So for example, like your family history increases your chances to get like certain cancers. So you would need that to help you determine or predict that information. So I think that's an interesting topic.
Thank you very much, Monica. So a couple of comments coming in from LinkedIn. One is from Rodney Beard saying that a lot of old school AI had a much greater engagement with ethical debates than the newer statistically based and function approximation type of stuff, machine learning. A lot of work was done exploring logic and ethics and action theory. The newer machine learning stuff would do well to look at the broader AI literature. I think that's what that says. Hoyen had a comment and perhaps a question here. It says algorithms are a series of instructions, but the ultimate bias inherent in them is they are created by humans, and whether by error or intent, biases come across. How do we keep improving and self-correcting and not just assume this is just tech? How do we ensure people's rights to dignity and privacy are upheld while we go gaga with data? That is definitely an interesting, I like that comment. I like that question as well. Anybody want to speak on that? Ben Taylor, go for it.
Yeah. And time flies. Look at all this gray. So I was trying to think how long it's been. So 7 years ago at HireVue, we had a team of PhD physicists that were building models that the data was biased. There were sexism, racism, ageism. It's guaranteed, it's unconscious bias. And we are coming up with techniques to actively remove adverse impact. So can we take a model to predict a performance output on a candidate, but also remove the bias that transfers racism, sexism, etc. So 7 years ago, we were making a lot of progress, a ton of progress. So I presented to the EEOC. We went into detail about what we're doing. Pymetrics was a big pioneer there as well. They're doing similar developments. And for the person that mentioned like looking into classical algorithms and techniques that were used, we looked into all those techniques, and higher view sense they've gone much further past that. So I think I've mentioned on this group before, is one of the best ways to mitigate it is you build models that compete. You build a model that predicts the thing you wanted to predict. You build a model that predicts all the things you're the most worried about. And something magical happens as you figure out the features that are driving the bias transfer. And so the classical example would be in a resume: name, fraternity, sorority, college, where you went to school, like all that stuff gets nuked immediately. No human expert had to come through and mark that up. AI was very quickly able to figure out these are the features I'm killing, because what is it doing? It's going to poison the model that's able to transfer race. It's going to poison the model that's able to transfer gender and biases. So so sometimes I get a little frustrated when people kind of talk about what are we going to do, or the world's ending, we can't make progress. We are making lots of progress, but not everyone's making progress. Like some people are still at stage 0. They don't need to be. The thing I mentioned, anyone on this call can go do it. Go build 2 models and you'll kill the features on the one that transfers race.
Would that be the again? That sounds like again to me.
You could do it with most models. Like if you use some of the classical models, it's a little bit more straightforward. If you're using some of the more exotic tree-based models, then really feature removal is the big thing. If I have 10 features in a competency-based model, I can't really throw features away. But if you're dealing with a resume, if you're dealing with these more exotic data sets, it's easy to have 10,000 features. So if I tell you I'm going to go throw 1,000 features away, words and mentions and different attributes, you can use any model you want. You pick your favorite model, and I'm just throwing features away, and that's a huge win for people that are concerned about bias. Actually, this conversation is very relevant. There's a current thread on LinkedIn right now where an article is called "LinkedIn's Job Matching AI Was Biased: The Company's Solution, More AI." And someone from LinkedIn is actually commenting on this article, asking this individual who's just dumping on them, hey, we want to help. Like, and I think that's the unfortunate thing. The last thing I'll say is, like, sometimes companies make mistakes. Like they're honestly trying and they will make mistakes. And it's unfortunate that we burn them at the stake as fast as we can, because here's this poor like LinkedIn engineer saying, we would love to hear your opinions. And people say, this is terrible. These algorithms aren't up for audit. They're not up for audit because you burn them at the stake the moment you find anything wrong, rather than us working together. How great it would be if we were so transparent. This is what we're trying. What do you think? Instead of just like, you messed up. Yeah, it's too bad. But I guess this goes into like, why are we so politicized, divided? Like, it's just a general human behavior beyond this. This is a bigger discussion.
Yeah.
I have a follow-up question for Ben for that.
Go for it.
Yeah.
Do you feel like, the big movers, like the companies who have way to change the needle, do you feel like they have the will to want to work, to want to fix this? Are they doing enough to say, look, we know this is a problem. We're willing to, fix it and create transparency to fix this, right? Do you see enough movement there?
That's tricky, because I'm thinking of like the whole Timnit thing. Like that's super complicated. Like it's just it's a mess, because if you're talking about things that are antagonistic towards the money-making portion of the business, that is problematic from a capitalistic perspective. So it's do the bigger companies have what it takes? I think they're doing useful research. I'm not familiar with all the research that they're doing, but I look at companies like Pymetrics. Like Pymetrics has been a thought leader in adverse impact mitigation. They're very their CEO is very outspoken about it. I mostly see the innovation coming from not the bigger companies when it comes to ethics. But Greg, I worry sometimes that maybe the bigger companies, they have massive targets on them. Like, how often do they get burned at the stake on a regular basis? And how nice would it be as a community if, hey, you guys screwed up. Here's a bunch of professors coming from MIT and Stanford that specialize in this. We'd like to work together. Yeah, humans are so funny that way. Like, the most negative things we could talk about with human behavior, like why are we acting like this? I could also say this is why we're so good at innovating. Like if Greg and I get in like this fierce competition on innovation, one of us is going to win. That's not a very nice teamwork thing to do. And so these things that are more emotional in negative with human spirit, they also lead, there's other flavors of them that lead to this competitive innovation. Like the hero's journey. Like why the hell would a human like climb over a mountain to die to see what's on the other side? That doesn't make any sense. But like here we are as humans. Like, sorry, I'm speaking too long, but
just real quick, Harpreet, you and I are both lovers of the six hats, right?
Yes.
It's like organizations need to have a blue hat data scientist, full-time blue hat data scientist watching for this kind of crap, not just this kind of crap, but also one that goes around and says, hey, what dirty data problems have you had? We'll go try to fix them at the source. Because when you're in the trenches, you're working on your stuff, you don't have time always to get up out of your chair and go say, hey, I'm worried about an ethic issue here. I'm worried about a dirty data source issue here, et cetera. It'd be so nice if there was a blue hat data scientist in every group.
So blue hat of the six thinking hats, definitely check that out. Blue hat is the thinking hat, right? And that's
thinking about the thinking.
Thinking
about what mode everyone's in. Yes.
Yeah. Control hat, organized thinking itself, sets the focus, calls for the use of other hats, monitors and reflects on the thinking process used. Good hat to wear. Vin, let's hear from you. And then if anybody else wants to speak on this, definitely let me know by raising your hand. But after Vin, if nobody else wants to speak on this topic, we'll go to Eric's question, who has a question about sampling, which ties back to something Tom was talking about or might even fit in here. Then Jacob has a question about data engineering, and I know exactly who I'm going to call on for that question. Then Deepanshu has some questions as well. Also, shout out to everybody else that joined. Makika, what's going on? Rodney Beard, Matt Diamond. Good to see you guys here. Then go for it.
I've worked in the same space that Ben did, and the problem with many approaches, and I'm not burning anybody at the stake, but this is really indicative of, okay, when do you stop? Because that's the biggest question with AI ethics is when does your accountability stop? When you look at a resume, nothing in that resume is a causal feature for employee performance. Nothing. Because it's a collection of words, and it's an ugly collection of words. But we can make some best guesses, right? We can all agree that if you read a resume, you can make a best guess on whether somebody's qualified and worth bringing in. But if you really go down the rabbit hole, you begin to realize that people who have been impacted by discrimination their entire career write resumes differently. They don't highlight their skills the same way as people who have been supported their entire career. And so you get to the point where if you really run down the rabbit hole, how far do you go? Do you build another classifier specifically for resumes that are written differently? And this is where I talk about that 4%. Because 85% of the people, that model that, the company's Ben's been pointing out, 85% of the people that model works amazingly for, but it continues to impact a small percentage of people who don't write resumes as well, but are as capable. Why don't they write resumes? Well, because the system that was there from time memoriam, it isn't the AI's fault, and it's not the data scientist's fault either, but that system has changed the way they write resumes, and it does. They don't write resumes the same way. They aren't as confident about a particular capability, even though their skill level with that capability could be exactly the same as someone else who has not experienced that level of discrimination. And so the bar for them to write confidently about it on their resume is higher because of that prior impact. Now, where does our accountability, knowing that, because you can run down the rabbit hole and figure it out, knowing that, where as data scientists, where does our accountability end? Do we have to mitigate that?
Thank you very much. It's been such a good discussion, man. Definitely one to listen back on. Doesn't look like anybody else has anything to say on this topic. If you do, please let me know by all means.
I was just going to respond 23 seconds to Vin. So that Vin brings up an excellent point that people write resumes differently, and that can have a negative impact. I think the resume should die and go away, and it should be replaced with job simulations, which is problematic in itself, but like, we're all data scientists. If you can put you through like a coding challenge that is practical, it's scored in real time, or like even enter a VR, AR simulation, like we already do that for call centers. Like for some simple jobs, you can go through a job simulation, but as that would be like the holy grail. Like, can you do the job? And I don't care about your background. Oh, you flunked out of school. Can you do the job? Like so many people could do, like I work in marketing, like fantastic people could work in marketing who've dropped out of college, but unfortunately they don't have that line in their resume, right?
Thank you, Ben. Anybody else? A lot of good stuff. A lot of good stuff going on in the chat as well. But I think we'll just keep the conversation moving just to get to everyone's questions. So let's go to Eric's question about sampling. But great discussions in the chat, and you could figure out what's going on in the chat if you join us every week. Go for it.
Already
Eric.
in the chat.
Yes.
All right, so I probably have like the lamest question of the night, especially compared to all the previous discussion. Whew. So this is just a little thing. I'm looking at data where I'm trying to see what proportion of this big old, just several thousand rows of data. So it's not unbelievably huge, but it's too huge for me to like go through and check and see how many of these might not meet a condition. And it's an on or an off. It's just a proportion thing. And I'm trying to think, okay, so if I have, let's just say 10,000, if I have 10,000 and I'm looking for a proportion and I think the proportion is small, like maybe 1%, I don't know how many I need to look at before I can say I'm confident of that. And I've kind of tried to Google it, and I know like I haven't been able to find something that like I can think through with my, Thursday or Friday adult brain to make sure I'm actually considering the right stuff. So that's basically my question is like, what am I missing?
Let's go to Tom for this one because Tom, you're actually talking about this earlier, so go for it.
Eric, my dear buddy, I was a bit
Yes, Tom,
distracted with
my dear
some
white-haired
other
friend.
things. It's actually dark hair. It's Zoom that's turning it white. But would you repeat your question because I was slightly distracted?
Yeah, I was just saying I have a big set of data and I need to find out what the proportion of them is that are, we'll just say failing instead of passing. And I think it's a small percentage, like maybe 1% or 1%. And trying to think, how do I know what my sample size is? It's like data science 101. I just have been stuck on it.
So would this imply, is this a classification problem?
No,
Sounds like you're just trying to do a test to see what proportion of some. Yeah, I'm trying to figure out what it is that you're asking. Yeah.
If I need to, so if I have 10, let's say if I have 10,000 rows of stuff and it's not easy, I can't just like do a pivot table to show me passes or fails. And so I need to see what proportion of them are failures. And I don't want to look through all 10,000 of them to get my percentage. So how many do I need to look through before I can say fairly confidently, it's 1%?
How do you qualify what's a failure is what I think we're missing.
Let's see
here. Is it a label value? That it was, is it your label column or what you think should be your label column and it says pass or fail?
So what it is right now is I'm looking at, let's see here. I'm looking at like entity names, and then I'm looking at some other related field to that, like just another entity, but sometimes there might be duplicates and sometimes they might not actually be a duplicate. Like it might be two people who both work for the same company, or it might be two different people who work for two different companies that have the same name. And I have to figure out, like, looking at them. This is something I have to do. I have to eyeball it and make a judgment call as a human being based on the other data that I have, which is why I can't just program an answer.
Yeah, it sounds like it's a form of dirty data. Is that right?
Yeah, kind of, yeah.
And there's not enough information to discern if maybe these two identical names are two different people because you don't have enough information.
I have enough information, but like if there's two Eric Simses that both happen to work for two companies that have the same name, and they very well could have the same name because we're talking about, you know, an entire country of, you know, 330 million people in 50 different states. There could be two people from A Plus Coin Laundry that are you know, Eric Sims, right? That'd be weird, but it's possible.
So it looks like Mark says he's worked on a problem that's similar to this. So let's hear from Mark, and then also Rodney might have a problem that he's worked on that's similar to this as well. Sounds just like a binomial proportion test. You just take a few random samples and do something like that, and then, you know, have a null hypothesis test and do that way. But Mark, what do you got?
Mine's gonna sound super scrappy in true startup fashion, but essentially I had a problem where working with EHR data, again, we had like massive big data. So we're using like Sparks. I couldn't like just go through everything. It was like millions of rows, but essentially EHR data sucks. And so when they were classifying the insurance type, they had numerous different types of insurance categories. This may be a little different because you're saying names, so that may have a lot more variability. But essentially what I did was just I negotiated with the stakeholder. I said, this is not going to be perfect, but what you have is utter horrible. This is horrible. So I can get you 80% there, and you just have to accept that that 20% is going to be wrong somehow. And work with them just to say, like, let's just get the ball moving forward and we can figure it out later. Again, startup hat. So got the negotiation down there so that the stakeholder was okay with that. And from there, I just randomly chose 500 rows and just self-labeled it. And so that could have done something like statistically significant, but again, startup, scrappy, just trying to move forward, get process down. I just self-labeled 500 rows and it's basically said like, all right, cool. This is like a validation set, right? And then I just used regex and some business logic and just created some logic to classify and create some rules. I ran it on all of my data, right? And then I ran it on my validation set to classify and create like a confusion matrix saying like, this is what the insurance classifications are. You know, this is what it looks like. And from there, I was able to go to the stakeholder and said, hey, I ran this on this validation set that I made. My bias is that I labeled it myself, but no one else is going to do it. You can go label it if you want, but you don't want to spend money on that. I reduced the nulls to less than 1%, and I have accuracy, F score, whatever you want to do, very biased, but like, this is what I have. And we have a baseline to quantify that's better than before. And so again, it's not perfect, but you create a process to be wrong. You quantify how wrong you are. So now you have a process to be right further later on.
Cool. And just very briefly, Eric, think about, okay, yeah, these may be text terms, but that doesn't mean you can't feature engineer. You could put two text terms together. I've done that many times to help me find dirty data and fix it, or feature engineer text before I encode it to numbers. We can take it offline, like I said in the chat, but I want to hear from whoever Harpreet wants to hear from, but I'm also eager to hear from Rodney.
Yeah, so let's go to Rodney. If anybody else wants to chime in after Rodney, let me know. Eric, I've linked you to something that hopefully is helpful. It's just a quick little read on sample size for estimating binomial proportion, and it compares different methods for doing that. But that's what it sounds like you might have. Rodney, let's hear from you. Then after Rodney, we will go to Jacob's question on data engineering, which I will hand that one over to Ben and Matt if they're still around. Ben is here. Matt, I don't know. Go for it, Rodney.
Yeah, so Harpreet, it's just like you said, it's just a test of proportions, right? So, and the question is, how large a sample size do you need in order to be able to test whether the proportion of successes or failures, whichever way you want to look at it, equals a particular hypothesized proportion? So there's basically two ways to do this. You can use the Z-score formula for the test of proportions, which is basically the difference between some estimated proportion and the hypothesis proportion divided by the square root of the product of the hypothesized proportion times 1 minus the hypothesized proportion divided by n, which is going to be your sample size.
I love that, by the way, you just like crank that. It's like, I'm just going to like throw that formula out off the top of my head.
Right. And then what you do is, so the numerator of that is basically your error, right? So what you do is you set a tolerance on the error, and then you rearrange that for a given tolerance to back out n, right? The sample size. And so that's one way of doing it. And then the second way you do it from a statistical perspective is you basically look at the power that you need to be able to test the hypothesis with, say, 80% power.
Okay.
And there's usually, so I'm not sure about tools in, say, Python for this. I'm pretty sure there are, but I'm not super familiar with them. But there's numerous tools for computing power available in something like R, for example. So
okay, cool.
It's a relatively well-known problem in statistics, I think.
Yeah, and it's like, as you're talking about, it's like, oh yes, of course, I've heard these things and learned them, but like I don't have to do this particular thing on a daily basis in my job. And so I'm like, well, good thing I got a question for Friday. Thank you.
So so just to clarify, it sounds like you have like a small set of data and you're just trying to make this inference saying, okay, like the larger data that is out there that I've yet to look at, I think that the proportion of whatever it is that I'm looking at is less than some certain threshold. That's what it sounds like you're trying to do.
And the question is how big a sample size you need, right? Which is precisely, I think, what Eric asked. So
yeah, and that's perfect. The other thing is like, I mean, I could, like, just business hat and the time I had, it's like I don't necessarily have to go through and calculate the right sample size, do every single little thing. Like, good enough was good enough for it, but it just made me think like, well, what if I was dealing with 10 million rows rather than 10,000, and what am I going to do? And just trying to think through that, because next week I could be dealing with that instead, and so just trying to be proactive about it, staying sharp.
Yeah. So here, I'll give you a link to this thing. It makes it super easy. You just plug and chug. It's really easy. So you don't have to do it in Python.
Exactly. That's it.
Cool.
All right, cool. Let's keep it moving. Jacob got a question about data engineering. Well, it's a good thing we got some data engineers in the building.
Jacob, good evening, everyone. So I'm trying to learn data engineering. So I saw Google Cloud course and AWS. So I'm a bit confused. I don't know which of them to take. And I also want to know if it's necessary to have like trying to remember. Okay, something that has to do with software development lifecycle, if it's necessary to have that as a data engineer as well. Those are my questions.
Yeah, definitely. Benjamin, go for it, my friend. Good to have you back, and good to hear from you, man.
Yeah, no, I know I just drop off like that, but just to give you kind of my perspective on it, I think to start out with, when you're looking for like whether you go AWS, Google, and so forth, I think usually I always say focus more general first, like in terms of like understand, like if you don't already understand like data engineering as a concept, I would focus more on those processes first, like understanding like streaming, batch ETLs, things of that nature, data warehousing, cloud data warehousing, kind of the differences first, because specializing, I think, can maybe pigeonhole you a little bit, but also like any of those things, like Google certificate, I've looked at it. It's very much geared towards Google, right? Like it's like, that's what it is. You're not going to learn, I think, how to be a data engineer. You're going to learn how to work with Google products. I don't think I've seen AWS's, I've seen like Azure's, but I think it's a similar story. And I think it's more important to be general, and then hopefully you can apply those skills with the different tools that they provide, because they all have kind of similar tools across their space. But at the end of the day, I think it's better to kind of, learn the general skill sets, ETLs, data pipelines, ELTs, things of that nature, and then apply that towards specific tools. That's just generally like how I feel about that. And then what was the second part of that question? There was one other part now I'm spacing on.
I'm talking about data engineering, software.
Oh yeah.
Sorry, life cycle about software development.
Yeah, no, I would say, you know, there's a lot of aspects that I think, you know, applying the similar principles like software development lifecycle to is valuable in data engineering. There's a lot of programming involved in data engineering. And even if you're not doing a lot of programming, there's often a lot of like SQL logic that, you know, I think benefits from similar like mentalities and principles. So I would say, yeah, you very much, I think, need to apply a lot of similar concepts. In fact, even when it comes to like dashboarding, I think like even there has some benefits that you can apply and treat it more like software and not just like an ad hoc thing. I think that's the big thing about data engineering is like we're building infrastructure that's meant to last for, you know, hopefully a long time and not just doing an analysis that will, you know, disappear after, you know, after it's mainly done. So it is much more like software in that way. Even if you're doing more like, I think, low code solutions, I think it still benefits from having similar testing, similar lifecycle process. Because again, it needs to be around for a long time. It's not just meant to be built and then destroyed, or built and looked at and then, you know, not looked at again. So I think it is important to, it's an important aspect of the work that we do.
All right, thank you.
Thank you very much, Ben. Matt Sharp.
Yeah, so I guess for the first point, you know, whenever anyone asks, you know, like, you know, what tools you should use, usually my recommendation is you should figure out what company you want to work for, figure out what rule or tools they use and learn those. Just because, you know, does it, you know, AWS or Google or, you know, Azure, whatever, like they all pretty much have similar ecosystems, and, you know, the code you end up writing is all very similar, but just slightly different. And so, you know, just learning one of them will make all the skills transferable. You know, it's similar, like, you know, learning a programming language. Should you learn Python, R, Ruby, C++, etc.? Like, you know, usually the best answer is if you know where you want to go, you know, choose the right tools that'll make you stand out to go work for that certain company. And I guess the second part of that question is, like, I think it's a really good idea to learn the software cycle. From my experience, I think for data engineer, so like, as far as I know, there's no colleges that offer a data engineering degree. Like, it's just such a new field. You know, I think data engineers only really came around as a title like 7 years ago. I mean, it's even newer than data science, but I think from my perspective, often it's easier to take like a software engineer and teach them data than it is to take a data scientist and teach them engineering. And so, I mean, generally you're going to do one of the two to create a data engineer, but I just think a lot of the engineering aspects are a little bit more rigorous and maybe a little less fun. And so, and so it's just a matter of kind of, yeah, learning that software engineering cycle is very useful.
Thank you very much, Matt. Anybody else want to chime in on this? Makiko, I know you might have some thoughts. I see you in the chat here, but I'm not sure if it's for a related question or.
I'm going to agree. As a data scientist that went over to the engineering side, it is a very, very hard hill to climb. Very hard. But I think it's worthwhile just depending on your incentives. Like, you know, I worked as a data scientist for a few years and I got to the point where I had a fork in the road. I could continue being like a very mediocre data scientist, if I would be really honest, or, and mediocre because I just didn't have that love of like innovation and to like go research questions and kind of be okay with like, okay, well, you know, 80% of research projects failing. Like, I just wasn't down with that. So I chose the engineering side, but, you know, I'm going to agree with Matt. It is a lot more rigorous. So for example, just taking a very, very simple workflow of Like we want to create a Python package and like, get it productionized and secure, right? You have to deal with everything from like, oh, like what cloud storage bucket do you create and destroy, like the IAM permissions, like all this other stuff. So like security, permissions, pipelining, robustness, what happens if like predictions go down, all this nonsense. So, I think that's just like something to consider. Yeah, it's definitely like learn principles and concepts. And then sort of, I would say like, don't go after, if you do kind of like chase after one of the solution providers, and that's the kind of keyword is like managed services for everything. I would say pick one and then sort of stick with it and kind of like learn the concepts, just because like GCP and AWS, they do have some kind of like similar offerings. And a lot of employers, they'll say like, if you look at the job description, they'll say like familiarity with one of GCP, AWS, Azure, duh. But essentially for a lot of companies, once they, adopt a provider, they will just kind of stick with it because it is very, very expensive to like move in between GCP and AWS and Azure. So, that's just kind of like, I think Matt and Benjamin, being the experts in this area, I think they totally nailed all those points. And just, personal experience wise, it is a very, 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 very hard move, which, make sure you're very informed as to kind of, what are the skills and the experiences you need to have, and make sure you appropriately kind of set up your learning and upskilling path, because there's a lot of rabbit holes that you could just kind of like get lost in, and you don't really want that. So.
Awesome. Makiko, thank you so much. Appreciate that. Let's go to Dipanshu's question. I think Dipanshu, do you have any?
Yeah, hopefully you guys can hear me.
Yeah, absolutely clear, man. Good to see you. How you doing?
I'm doing good, man. My question is tailored specifically for Ken, Win, and you, Harpreet. And it's centered around content creation. Because I believe you guys have skin in the game and have like significant experience like building and understanding your brand. I just have a couple of questions in terms of content creation. So I see this uptick, this upwards trend in like viewership and engagement for social media platforms just in times of COVID. And I was wondering, like, what do you guys think if this trend is going to continue for the long term? Or do you think like as we go back to normalcy and as spaces, public spaces and offices start to open up, are we going to see like a natural decline or decrease in this viewership? Like for someone like who's contemplating coming up, creating their own content and coming up with their own thing, I was curious, like, what do you guys think of this trend? So that's number one. And just wait really quickly, I was also wondering, and I'm curious to know, like, for all four of you, like, what is this process like on like a day-to-day basis? Like, do you plan and schedule your content a week or a month ahead, or is it like a day-to-day engagement where like it's driven by what problems or what questions people are coming to you for? So just like, what do you think about the trend and the process of content creation?
Yeah, definitely. I'm excited to hear what everybody has to say on this. I'll just say that I think that when it comes to content creation, you have to think about the effect of the long tail, right? And the more that you can niche down and really hone in on the things that you are interested in, that you can truly be authentic speaking on and creating content for, there's always going to be an audience out there for you. Will it be 10 million people? Will it be 100 and how many 40-something thousand, 50-something thousand YouTube subscribers? Or will it be 75,000 downloads on a podcast that's had hundreds of episodes? I don't know, right? But the internet makes this possible, right? That there is always going to be some niche that you can serve that will still allow you to create content that you love while being authentic to yourself and doing something unique and original. That the internet just makes that possible, right? The long tail is a thing. I had another point. They'll probably come to me later and I'll interject.
Yeah, that's a great one. I want to add a third question to that. So what do you guys think is like the top 5 or the most like talked about topics, or like in terms of content creation, what are the topics that you feel hasn't been given that much attention or there is scope in this space of data science and AI?
Yeah, that's a good question. I don't have a readily available answer to that. I mean, I think one thing for sure maybe is we just had an hour-long discussion on ethics. I don't see many people posting about that or talking about that, and I feel like maybe it's something I'm not actively seeking out at the moment, but I just don't see any of that in my feed popping up and things like that, right?
Yeah, thanks for that, man.
But I mean,
That helps.
ML ops and just intersections, right? But I mean, the thing is, like, instead of addressing the 5 things that why don't you go in and see, okay, what are things that people aren't talking about that I could talk about, that I can say something valuable and contribute something to discussion, and then let me go talk about it, right? No one's gonna listen.
Sounds like a great blog post to me, the 5 things that people aren't talking about enough in the data science space, right? Like it's thinking about those things, because if you're having those questions, other people are also going to be having those questions. And something that I've always lived by is the things that that I find interesting are the things that I want to create content about. If I'm finding these interesting, if I'm reading all of the other things, I'm listening to or following all the incredible creators that are in the space in this even specific Zoom, there's going to be something that I want to dive into further, that I want to add more context in, that I want to give my experience on. And that's going to be something that inevitably someone, I would imagine I'm not the only in any scenario, would also be interested in. In terms of growth, in terms of the landscape, there's so many forces at play. I look at like trends in the terms data science, machine learning, AI. They fluctuate almost on a day-to-day basis, and my viewership, whatever it is, does correlate pretty heavily with those things. And so to me, it's like, as long as this field is continuing to grow, the after effects of people, maybe like doing a lot of learning at home or whatever it might be, that might be a part of it. But I expect that there's going to be a continued growth in content in this space regardless. I mean, you look at Medium, for example, there's some really good articles, but it's like overflowing with so much content now to speak of. And I really think that if you're producing good things and you're creating value and you're sharing it with community, and you're engaging in the community, that's one of the key things. That's what helps to establish you, or to help you to grow if you want to go down more of a content creator path. To me, there's so much value in like sharing what other people are doing. I find it fascinating. Why wouldn't I want to share what my friends are working on or whatever it might be? And that's how you grow. It's not about what you create or the other things. It's how you find your place in the broader community and the value you can provide and pervade across the whole thing. I don't know exactly where I was going with that, but
no, that's really interesting, Ken.
I like that a lot.
Think of like in terms of motivation as well, like what are the primary motivations that you guys have? Like is it like financial independence, or like community building, or cloud, or is it like a mixture of all those things, like in terms of
all
what
cloud.
drives you?
No, I think I've been pretty vocal about this, is that, for example, I started making YouTube videos because I enjoyed making them. Like I really enjoyed that process, and I would have never thought that so many people would have watched them by now, right? Like that blows my mind every day. And I did that because I love that process, and it helped me to learn. It helped me selfishly to improve my ability to speak and to convey information. I think that that's something that's really important. And, selfishly, I have the podcast, which is continuing to grow, and I talk to incredibly intelligent people like bi-weekly, and I get to ask them questions that I'm fascinated in. I get to learn, and I get to push my learning forward through these mediums. And the beautiful thing is I get to share the learnings that I have with everyone else who's tuning in. So this selfish pursuit, or somewhat selfish pursuit, of information on my end leads to broader information and sharing throughout a larger community. And I think that I don't know if that's the motivation for everyone. I think obviously I've made a reasonable income. I've gained more financial independence. I've gained a following, but to me, it's always been about that pursuit of like knowledge and interest. And like the more people you have following you, the more like interest you have, the more like different questions you get, the more information you have to process, the more different directions your brain can go to uncover new questions that you might not have previously thought of on your own. So it's this it's the development of this beautiful ecosystem that, at least for me, makes me keep wanting to do it and keep diving in further.
Yeah, man, absolutely love
Yeah.
that. I mean, I'd also say, like, to Ken's point, the best way to learn something is by teaching it. If there's something that
Right.
I don't understand, okay, I'm just going to teach it, right? Like, okay, I kind of need to get good at deep learning, especially for the new job, and I don't know much about it. So let me create 21 days of deep learning and just do that and hold myself accountable to the entire public that I'm going to learn this thing and I'm going to share that journey with you guys. And I mean, in terms of motivation, why I do this, dude, like, let's see how far I can push the boundaries. How big could I get this thing? Who can I get on that you know, people say that I can't, like, oh, you crazy going after that guy. Let me just try it, right? Because I'm trying to be
Yeah.
I'm trying to be Joe Rogan. That's my competition, right? Like, I mean,
Nice.
not these other
That's a
big
good benchmark.
podcasts. I mean, John Crone, you're my homie, you're my good friend, but I'm not competing with you, my friend. Super Data Science, great podcast, but yeah, I mean, I'm competing with Joe Rogan, Tom Bilyeu, James Altucher. You know, that's what I'm envisioning. I'm just seeing if can I get that big? Can I push it there? Can I do something that massive? Let's go to Benjamin.
Yeah, no, I guess wanted to poke in a little bit as, I mean, somewhat of a content creator, at least on YouTube more recently, but on Medium now it feels like forever. I think it's like 3 or 4 years. I think what's like interesting, like as you're trying to like niche down and things of that nature, I think one thing, because I think Ken brought this up earlier, like, you know, there's like so many articles. I don't know how many articles are posted per day on Medium, but it's, you know, a ridiculous number. I think Medium has done something similar in terms of like how the like very like what do you call it, digital cameras on phones have also taught us something very important, which is we all suck at taking pictures. And if you're able to take very good pictures, and which is a very hard skill to get, you know, it's a very valued skill. In the same way, there's a ton of people producing content, but producing content is such a hard skill to really get good at and like to find a niche in, that if you can do it well, I think you're going to stick out. I think that's always something I always think about. It's like, okay, how do I just, you know, if I just keep putting out good content, you know, I'll stick out, and all the other content that maybe is not as good will just make my content look better. And I put out terrible content too all the time. YouTube loves letting me know that when it's like, oh, this video is doing 9 out of 10 compared to your last videos. It's like, okay, well, just gonna stop making videos. No, but yeah, that's generally, I think, like my view of it. As far as planning, I know I should be do a much better job at like content planning. I like try to like make these plans, like, oh, I'm gonna make these videos, and then, you know, between working full time and consulting, it's like, okay, well, now I gotta ditch these videos and focus on that. But yeah, I think content planning would be very helpful just in terms of like long-term strategy. I think that's definitely something I would like to pick up more. That's like doing things like the 21 days of deep learning, things like that would be, I think, a good habit to start building. So yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I missed that second part there. In terms of content planning, I guess I could talk about content planning in two ways. There's planning in terms of planning when I'm posting. So I use Canva for that, and I'll just post on Canva and schedule out posts and stuff like that. In terms of actual ideas, I've got an idea journal right here. I just write ideas of things I want to create and just do that. And then in terms of when it happens, like, I'll just, like, if I'm just inspired in the moment, like, all right, I'm just gonna do this and just create a ton of content. Like, I've got more content than I know how to release, these little infographics and things like that. Like, I've got so much stuff, it's ridiculous. So I mean, my new strategy is gonna be, okay, I'm just pushing only stuff from the podcast from my podcast page instead of my personal page, just because I'm going to do something crazy. I'm going to do 168 hours of content. That's what I got planned. That's what I got to schedule out this weekend, is one piece of content every hour for 168 hours, which is number of hours in a week, and do that entirely through my Artist of Data Science page. Let's go to Ken, then Mark, then Vivian.
Yeah, I just wanted to highlight something that Ben said. Ben, I don't think we've actually met in person yet, or like face to face, but we've exchanged some emails. Excited to talk more to you. But you don't necessarily have to stand out because of the topic area. You can stand out by having a different take. Let's say it's like one of the ways I differentiated my YouTube channel from the onset is that I made what I thought to be more cinematic videos around data science concepts. They're incredible creators. Like Krishnak, Code Basics, and quite a few others that are doing similar things, and they're competing in different ways. So Krishnak produces a video every single day, right? I knew I could not do that. I knew that I could not create a niche for myself based on volume. And I thought, okay, if it was pure subject area knowledge, like I think I'm a decent data scientist, but it's not like I'm an absurd expert in any of these specific niches. So why not leverage some creativity? Why not use like some stupid comedy or what I believe to be funny to make these more interesting or go on some of these different themes? And then the last thing is another guy who I really look up to, a good friend of mine, the data professor. He creates these beautiful hand-drawn infographics and he shares them, right? That's not something I've really seen too many people do. And that's helped him, aside from his channel, to really grow and expand beyond what he was doing before. And so I think just framing the information in a different way, making it more digestible, even if it's the same stuff, and giving credit to people who, who are doing similar things, like that also creates value. And if you can bring in another additional skill set, great. If you can look at it or share it in a different way. I have nothing to add on the organization. I like plan my podcast episodes. I just like make videos. I have a schedule where I do one a week. I have this huge list that I go through and I do some polling. I need to get better at the systemization of that though.
Yeah.
Yeah, thanks for that, Ken. That really resonates.
Yeah, definitely. Sorry.
Yeah, definitely. I'm by no means no big name like Ken and Harpreet, but definitely.
Dude, I follow you as well. I follow you as well. I follow most of the people, if not all, on this panel. I've been in the dark too long. Decided to turn on.
I still feel small, and I like the small mentality. But the thing is, like, I'm growing, and like I like that aspect of like it's the hustle component. For me, the key driver for doing this is like, is it fun? Am I creating content that's fun for me? Because I recently did a whole analysis on my LinkedIn post and its engagement, and I actually tried a whole like specific content strategy and it bombed completely. And it showed up in my data, like all my views and engagements just dropped because just the strategy didn't work. But I kept with it because I think at that point I could have just gave up. It was like, this isn't working for me anymore. I don't have the same views. But because it was so fun just to create content, I kept on going, and now my numbers are going back up. And so I think that's the key thing is like, can you create content that's fun? Because if you're trying to write for other people and it doesn't align with being fun, it's going to show up in your content. It's going to suck on all ends, right? I think that's what happened with my campaign. I was writing on things I wasn't having fun with. The other aspect is consistency. So when I first started, I was going like twice a week, just doing it consistently. And now I post every single weekday. And now it's just a habit where if I don't post in the day, something feels off. And I just need to get a thought out there. And then the other aspect that I really care about now is like I pulled this page from Gary Vee, who I think is just really good at being a content creator. Hate him or love him, I personally love him. But essentially, you create key content. So like you have your podcast or your videos. For me, I'm trying to make my key content being like Python tutorials for like how to do like an analysis and data science. And I essentially like break my content either like a burn up to that. So like I'll post about my process and then release finally and build up momentum around it. Or I'll do like a podcast or a live stream with someone and then I have that content. I ask them that if I have permission to use it. And now I can break that up in different pieces and share that later on. And so you get these large pieces of content and you break it into smaller ones and just have consistency day in and day out. And what I've noticed is that now with the consistency, earlier I was getting maybe like 10 followers a week, 50, and now I get like 150 followers a week, and it's gonna grow hopefully. And so that's the main thing. Have fun, do it consistently, build cool projects or main pieces of content and break it apart to scatter around.
Got it. So just consistently posting things that you love and you can talk about in some fashion.
Yeah.
Thank
And
you so
then
much,
that was another thing is like also find your niche. So I think and I'm curious how others think, but I don't think it's right. Like finding the right topic to talk about is that you create your community around a topic they care about. And so you choose the topic that it is, and you find, instead of finding the right topic, you find the right community to build around that.
Got it.
Vivian, go for it.
I guess that I was thinking about how I get these questions from people a lot of like, and we've all talked about this of like, how do I get started? Like, how did you like do this? And so I'm not some big content creator, but I feel like this kind of principle applies to anything, is like that you just start, like, and it's okay to just start and like make kind of crappy things at first. And like, that's fine. Like, you just do it. Like I'm convinced that the biggest difference between like me being, employed as a data scientist and somebody who's just starting out is that it's time, like that I just like put in a certain amount of time, and like, sure, like natural ability and talent and things like that can come into it, but like 80% of it is just like putting in time and like learning step by step, and this idea of like finding your niche and, and the way that you plan content creation, like those are all like great things. Like, I'm not trying to, dismiss anybody saying that, like they're great ideas and great things. But if you're not like first just putting in time and like just doing it, like that's going to be what gets you 80% there. And then trying to like do these things to like find a niche or find, how many times should it be posting? Like if I include certain keywords, if I do this or that, like that's like the 20% of like tweaking to try to like increase your performance up at the top, but really what will get you 80% there is just to do it, to start, to put in that time. And like the rest of the path will reveal itself like as you go on.
Yeah, thanks for that point, Vivian. I usually like overthink a lot to the point of like reaching perfection before even posting anything. Like even if it's a two-liner post, I think, yeah, maybe I'll have to change that thought process to like, doesn't matter as long as you're like consistently posting or something.
And maybe I can try to abstractly connect Vivian's idea with something Ken put in the chat here. I mean, be a niche of one, right? So instead of trying to say find your niche, just be your own niche. My niche is just being Harpreet Sahota, because nobody can compete with me on being me. It's impossible for anyone to try to do, which is related to what Ken is saying here. It's more stable to build a niche around how you talk about topics compared to specific topics. And if I can quote Naval Ravikant here when he's talking about becoming the best in the world and specific knowledge, he says when you're searching for what to do, and in this case, the what to do here is content creation, you have two different foci you want to keep in mind at all points in time. One is you want to be the best at what you do, and next is what you do is flexible so that you become the best at it. Right. And then you get to a place where you're comfortable, a very comfortable place where you're like, yes, this is something I could be amazing at, still be authentic to who I am. And it's not like an overnight discovery or anything. It's a journey. You just create, keep creating. And I mean, I still haven't figured my shit out yet. Like, I don't like, I mean, Ken's got his his personality figured out, right? No, it's not figured out yet. No?
You guys have skin in the game,
well,
for sure.
One last thing I'd like to say is, from like the content creation part of my brain, not my like full-time work or any of the other stuff. Like, what is the goal of creating information online, right? It's to create value, but it's also to get to a place where people listen because it's you saying it, not necessarily because of what you're saying. And like, you get to that point because what you're saying creates value. But I would love to be able to be in a place where one day I could make any video that I wanted that was as interesting as possible to me, and people would be interested in it because I created it. Right. That is like the personal branding mecca. And I think that carries some challenges with it, right? Like it's hard to differentiate your life, your personal life with your public life in some of those senses. But like, if I was getting paid to do whatever I wanted to do and create whatever I wanted to create every single day, that to me seems like a pretty incredible existence, because you're like living what you believe and you want to create. And so I would start thinking about it as like, what would I like to be making every day? What would I like to be producing every day? And if you start doing that and you start growing because of it, you're going to be really motivated to do that, to continue to make it. And you're also going to be able to create a beautiful following that likes you for your value, but also likes you for the very unique and individual things that you bring. They like you for being Harpreet, right? They like me for being Ken and the little weird idiosyncrasies that we both can occasionally bring.
Yeah, Ken, I love papayas as well.
Yeah, speaking of papayas, somebody commented here on LinkedIn. I enjoyed Ken's papaya Q&A. None of the other data tubers that I follow do things like that. So I was being authentic to himself. Greg, you had your hand up as well, Greg. Let's hear from you, man. I barely heard from you today, my friend. How you been?
No, I was gonna say to the punch, at the end of the day, it's about you projecting yourself into, I guess, the future, and kind of looking back, asking yourself, how did I get there, or how do I want to get there, right? So if you see yourself as someone who's knowledgeable in a certain subject, whatever that subject is, what the internet has allowed us to do, what as Ken was saying, is to talk about it and to showcase our journey or talk about our journey. I think people gain followers because they can relate, right? They can relate somehow, whether they're also experiencing the same thing or they would like to adventure in the same thing. So that's what I describe as a follower, right? If you think about the biggest soccer superstar right now has followers, not because they think they can be soccer superstars too, which is Ronaldo, by the way, from Portugal. It's because they relate to where it comes from, right? So Ronaldo from Portugal, Mikiko. He's probably the most followed soccer star on Instagram, and it's all about creating transparency about your journey, and that's what makes the internet so beautiful. And you're being vulnerable by sharing what you learn along your path, and you're consistently doing so. And with time, it builds up, it creates this flywheel where more and more people will take notice into your progress. And even though people may not relate to what you're trying to achieve, but they relate to you making progress, that may give them motivation to do their own thing or to hop on their own journey, right? So there's always a benefit to that. So the most important thing is, and I think people said it already, is to start, as Vivian said, start somewhere and then keep going. If I could give a confession here, I don't consider myself a content creator on LinkedIn. To me, a content creator is the Harpreet, the Tom, of the world, who have like this mechanism, like whether it's on YouTube or this platform, the podcast and things like that. For me, I'm a vehicle, and I do it with a purpose. I like to connect with people who know stuff, who know things. And with that, I like to bring my special set of skills or knowledge to make sure I help them achieve something, right? So I'm a connector. I've always been good at that. And by tapping into quality pipeline of things that are going on, I just selected one subject, which is AI realm, which is huge. And I just talk about things in my way of understanding it. And with that, people come to me to ask for ideas. And I help them along the way. So my endpoint is to talk to a lot of startup founders and help them along that journey. Another endpoint that I have personally is to enhance my brand, where I can feel the freedom to put a price on my head for either consultation from a person who's from the business, or put a price on my head in terms of getting hired by anyone, right? So again, it's going to be depending on what you want to do, or to what level you want to become a content creator. Somebody who posts on a daily basis, like myself on LinkedIn, you want to call that a content creator? Yeah, I can't. I don't know. I don't see myself as a content creator. I'm just a vehicle, a spreader of news, or a spreader of news in my own way of understanding it. But I know it does generate value. I'm not saying I'm not creating value. I know it does. Like, some people find it valuable. But it's up to you to deep dive. Do you want to be the person who does it well through Medium? Go for it. If you want to do it with YouTube, go for it. But at the end of the day, you have to have the will to keep going. You have to have the will to know that it doesn't, you don't find success at day one, right? You have to keep going. So your first YouTube videos will suck, or your next 100 videos will suck. And then next thing you know, that one trigger will send you to the moon, and people will constantly go back to the older videos because they know, hey, this guy has been producing for so long. So at the end of the day, it's what you do on a daily basis that will pile up to that compounding effect. So there's no good way, bad way of doing it. So just start.
So
Hey, Greg.
Greg claims to not be a content creator on LinkedIn, so I spotlight everybody here. Look on the bottom right. That's the LinkedIn Top Voice Award that he has. So I don't know.
Greg, do you aspire to be a content creator though? Do you aspire to be? If you're not,
I do. I had a I think Kenji, you did invite me to your podcast, right? And we talked about that. I don't know if you remember, Kenji, but
I remember. When you're ready.
I know you're waiting for me. I need to come to you, but I haven't had the courage to start. So I told Ken during that podcast, right, that I want to start this YouTube channel where I invite startups to discuss. So to answer your question, long story short, is yes, I want to do so. Time is my biggest enemy. It's a matter of really understanding what I want to do, and also doing something that nobody else is doing out there. So I want to make sure I understand what it means. Will every startup founders want to be present in my podcast to talk about their secret sauce? I highly doubt it, right? Because of the landscape, right? They have to protect their secret sauce. So I'm still munching on that. So I still have you in my mind, Ken. So hang tight for that. So he's my go-to mentor for starting a good YouTube channel. So
let's hear from Matt Diamond here, and then after Matt Diamond, Ken's got an interesting question, and then after Ken's question, we will wrap it up. Go for it, Matt.
Yeah. Hey guys, just a question along the lines of what Greg was saying. Is there any motivation that you change when you're putting content out there? It's like, is there a line between authenticity and palatability? Like, will you change how something is described to make it resonate with a wider audience? Or is that not even a consideration when putting a video or a post out there? Or am I just overcomplicating this?
No, absolutely, you're right. So my purpose is to simplify it in my own layman term, is to take something that may have taken me an hour to read, and to quickly summarize it in the first top 3 lines on the LinkedIn post that would make somebody want to know more, or at least make a short summary on a LinkedIn post that somebody may not need to open the appended doc to deep dive, or if they're interested more, they have a pretty good idea of what's in there based on my understanding of the content. And when with that, some people may come in and say, your summary sucks or your summary helped. Regardless, I learn from that and I get better. At the end of the day, I help myself to better communicate, to read faster. I help myself to better, write summaries, et cetera, because I'm aware that people don't have time. And there's so much content out there that you need an optimal way of consuming these things, and even filtering out the things that are not necessary. So you're absolutely right. I do it with the purpose of putting my own spin. If it's not my own spin, I always make sure I quote it, because it helps me a lot. And or ahead of time, I will ask somebody, hey, I like that. Do you want me to, give me permission to share that with the audience? And I know I've done that with a couple people in this audience right now who create good content that I'm just passing on to the bigger audience.
Yeah, that's super helpful. I follow data people, not anybody here. I mean that. I feel like there's just a bunch of little dopamine nuggets that are nice in the moment, but they can't be contextualized for the problem or the issue that I'm really deeply engaged with at the time. So great stuff like that is super helpful.
Awesome.
Right on, guys. Excellent discussion. Deepanshu, thank you very much. Hopefully this gets you going, man. Let's see some stuff come from you. Ken, go for it.
Yeah, so I have one last kind of fun question to end on. And so it's completely hypothetical, but if a data scientist were to be a protagonist in a movie, what genre would that movie have to be in order for you to be willing to watch it? I mean, we have like drama, we have
Sherlock
mystery,
Holmes.
we have horror, thriller, whatever it is. So,
Sherlock Holmes.
so that's I guess mystery genre. Go ahead, Greg.
Mystery genre.
Mikiko, go for
I'll play the lead.
I would let Mikiko go. Mikiko, you had your hand.
Chat's also fine for this one.
Hey, sorry guys, I was eating, and also I was listening to all of you because I don't like listening to myself sometimes. Actually, though, so my earliest like kind of connecting with data science was actually the show Numbers. So it was a crime murder mystery, and it was on CBS, I think, for like 7 seasons. And what was great was essentially it was like this older brother is a police officer. The younger brother is like, the smarty pants who at like age 8 or 10 or whatever got his PhD and something along the lines. And he would provide all these different little, like obviously each show was like solving a crime based off of like a principle. But then Wolfram Mathematica at the time had provided like a website that would show you demos of each of the simulations. So I'm like, and I feel like if I see a data scientist in something like, I don't know, like the Hallmark Channel or something on a romance, I'd be horribly disappointed because let's be honest, it would be them coming up with a spreadsheet going like, okay, like, let me see if I can input like all my sort of wants and like score them, and them coming up with a bunch of fake profiles and then like catfishing people to see how they could better like tailor the content, which someone actually did write a book on. So that happened in real life. So yeah, crime, murder, mysteries. That would be my jam.
What book was that?
Oh my God. I don't remember, but it was pink and it was like Love and Numbers or something. And it was by this like author who is a professor of presumably either political science or something like that. So basically she was like, oh, I'll just use numbers to solve this, because she's like, realistically, how many eligible also Jewish men of a certain age that are single and willing to mingle, but at the same time are in it for the long haul in New York. So I think it was something along those lines. If you look up data, numbers, dating, spreadsheet, catfishing, yeah, she did a TED Talk on it too. So that was really cool.
Yeah, so I don't know if you guys seen this TV show. It's Jack Ryan, Tom Clancy's Jack Ryan. Jim from The Office is in there. Jim Krasinski. No, his name's not Jim Krasinski. I forgot what his actual real name is, but
John Krasinski.
John Krasinski. Yeah. So I'm pretty sure he's a data scientist, because there's some episodes where he was talking about writing custom SQL queries and making
He was
Python
a financial analyst. Yep.
Right.
Yes.
Yeah, I saw that as well.
And so, I mean, before I get to Mark, I just wanted to chime in on this idea while it's on top of my head. I would make it like a romantic comedy. It would be something like a data scientist who works at like something like Match.com, but gets disenfranchised by the corporate thing, and then goes off and just starts matchmaking himself and doing some interesting stuff, like something like he'd be like Hitch, but like a data scientist. And it'd be a rom-com, because rom-coms are awesome. I love rom-coms.
I was thinking that too, like a bachelor, bachelorette, and then having like the data scientist try to explain what he does and just bore everybody. What do you like to do in your spare time? Create spreadsheets.
There's actually not that I watched The Bachelor for fun. My wife used to make me watch it, but there's one season when there's actually a data scientist who's describing his job. I was like, oh, he's a data scientist. It was funny. Tom, let's go to you, and then let's hear from Mark.
I was just going to say real quick, one of my wife's friends was trying to explain to others what I do. Is he's like Chandler from Friends. You can't really know what Tom does, and that was the most hilarious explanation I've ever heard.
But Chandler was a data scientist. His job was statistical analysis and data reconfiguration. He was a data scientist. Mark, let's go to you, and then Greg.
I was about to say, I think the two options for me is one be there's a manga, wherever it is, and it's specifically that character who's like, I know this exact calculation for this reason why I stood right here, and that's why I'll defeat you. Like all the calculations in the head can just defeat you with just logic by itself. Or like Shikamaru from Naruto, if you're a Naruto fan, right? The other one on the more grittier side would be a cyberpunk thriller. So essentially corporations have taken over the Facebooks, the Googles, and it's up to our fearless data scientists to crack the code and understand the data to stop them from ruining the world.
Man, so that's some good stuff, man. So Greg is an actual science fiction writer, or you wanted to be a writer, so this is your opportunity, man. Pitch us your plot.
I'd like to be one day, right? And by the way, I did talk to a couple people who actually want to automate that, right? The script writing using AI. So I've been pretty excited about that, talking to these folks and what they're doing in this industry. So I'm a big fan of sci-fi. So one thing I always think about is this world where companies have been taken over by AI, right? They're telling us, they're creating the balance between supply and demand in terms of who needs a job, who doesn't, controlling whether you are fit for joining a company, which are, again, the board of directors are just, AI entities who are kind of telling you what to do and things like that, and scoring you whether you qualify. So there's no such thing as an interview or whatever. So and then you have a group of people who are trying to fight this system. So whether they're data scientists or trying to understand what kind of logic these AI entities who are controlling the big things are doing to us and how that affects society. So I always think about those things. If you follow Prime, there's this show called Electric Dreams. I am hoping they can do season 2, but Electric Dreams is a series of each episode isn't connected to the other. So there's a different set of actors for each episode. Each episode is its own story. And it's kind of like a twisted story, but it's super set in the future. And they're exploring human societal issues. Where being a terrorist might be seen as a disease, or being racist might be seen as a disease, and how to surface that, et cetera, et cetera. So it explores a lot. I like those kind of dark, gritty, future sci-fi settings right there.
Sounds like Black Mirror.
Yeah.
Yes, exactly.
That's what I was
Black
thinking
Mirror.
too.
Yes.
Yeah.
So
Like Black Mirror.
Vivian says it's a anthology type. Makiko says you can argue that any movie about surveillance is basically AI ethics and simulation. I think there's a movie like Eagle Eye with Shia LaBeouf that's all like AI or something like that.
Oh yeah, that was good.
Yeah, Monica, what kind of movie would you what kind of movie do you envision with the data scientist?
Oh, I was just thinking about the romance, like the reality TV show. I just think that would be so hilarious.
Vivian or Russell, anybody else?
No, thank you for entertaining me, everyone.
I think planning on making a web series.
Yeah, so that's what comes next. Next.
No, I just think it's fun to have these high level conversations. I personally like the sci-fi angle, like aliens visit and we have to decode all their signals and whatever it might be. That could be a really interesting thing, and like a perfect use case for like where data scientists I think would probably stand out. Like a cross between, you could bring in linguistics, you could bring in like movement patterns, and if they are anomaly detection, a lot of really interesting stuff on that front.
Did you like Arrival then?
I did like Arrival,
was
yes,
a good one.
quite a bit. Yeah,
good one for that. Yeah, with the linguistic stuff. I don't know how she translated that alien language, but it was a cool movie for that. So yeah.
I agree.
Like
I definitely agree.
Where a data scientist creates like some type of glasses that allows him to see different possible outcomes from every decision that he makes, right? So he sees like probability distributions of the future and is able to act accordingly. But then he makes a wrong turn and things go crazy. I don't know. I'm just making shit up off the top of my head. That'd be interesting too. Looks like there are no other questions, no other movies that people want to see. That is great wrap up, guys. Thank you so much for joining. Been over 2 hours. That's awesome, man. Hopefully you guys get a chance to actually tune into the podcast. I released an episode today with somebody I think that we all know, Jonathan Tesser. He comes by and gives us his testimony. Jonathan Tesser, you guys probably know him from LinkedIn. He's a cool guy. Really enjoyed speaking to him. So definitely tune into that. Yeah, that's pretty much it. Tom, I see you're.
I just love this whole meeting. And
Yeah.
Ken, you were on fire. And I just wanted to echo, well, all of you were, but when you're posting anything, share because you care, fill holes. I love that. I think we were all saying basically that, but I think you can't go wrong. And the more you post, the more traction you're going to get. If you really are sharing because you're caring and you're trying to fill holes in the community in a caring way, you're going to win.
You didn't go for it.
I just wanted to share my good news that I got a job as a data
Hey.
scientist at, get this, Facebook. Believe it.
Oh, nice. Congrats, dude. That's awesome.
Thank you. I can hardly believe
Dude.
it, but I'm super excited about it.
Dude, so excited, man. Congratulations. Why'd you wait so long to drop that news?
Because I didn't want to interrupt all these great like
Dude.
movie ideas and all the things that were happening. But
Man, Vivian, that's so awesome. Congratulations.
Thank you.
Congratulations. Awesome, man. So guys, thanks again for tuning in. Great discussion today. Hope you guys join us next week, and don't forget to tune in to the podcast, give it a listen. Also, I'm trying to like up my game on Instagram, so follow me, Data Science Harp. I'll try to push fire content. So that'd be great if you guys could hit follow. Guys, take care. Have a great rest of the weekend. Remember, my friends, you've got one life on this planet. Why not try to do something big? Cheers, everyone.